And that's really true, that whenever we hire somebody and they can already do the job eyes closed, they're not going to stick around for long, or if they are not going to be engaged with what you want your company to be. So long story short, I always say hire someone to do 80% of the job and allow room for them to grow.
Welcome to Investment Grade Practices Podcast, where we believe private practice dentists deserve to get the lifestyle today while building an asset for tomorrow. Join your host, Victoria Peterson, to design the practice of your dreams and secure your financial independence. Let's get started.
It is absolutely going to be the death knell of anything sustainable. And as you said, so people, passion, purpose, and then profit. And as I teach my students, you always want to start when you're, if you're thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, or you're thinking about, starting your own business one day. Why do you want to do it? Because if you're only in it to make the money, you're actually not going to be happy, and you may not make as much money as you want to. But if you, decide you want to go into dentistry, for example, what is it that drives you? What gets you out of bed in the morning about dentistry? What is your focus? And it's not enough to just recognize that, but you have to define it, and you have to define it publicly for yourself, your management team, your employees, and also for your customers, because it's, no business or practice can be attractive to all potential customers out there. So you have to decide which segment of the customers are you going to focus on, and you want to be able to connect with them through that purpose, through that why. If you want to provide, either very cutting edge technological advances, or a very comforting environment for all those that are, incredibly afraid to go to the dentist. And so you want to give them a place where they feel taken care of and nurtured, and it's not a horror show. And I'm sorry, I'm thinking back to, my days as a kid going to the dentist where it was a horror show. Or if you want to provide very fast service at lower prices, not going into specialties, but to focus more on providing, decent care, more on a volume thing. These are going to attract very different customers. So you have to define what is it that your focus is. And then not only once you've identified that, you've got to be able to hire the right people that also will support that purpose. Because if you want to hire a very, or you want to build a very nurturing, caring type of environment so that 2 or 3 generations of the same family are going to come to your practice and you want it to continue into the future, you can't hire someone that all they want to do, say as an assistant or a hygienist, is come in at 9:00 on the dot, do exactly what their job description says, and then leave at 5, regardless. They will not have that same perspective, and they will not treat your customers in the way that you want them to be treated, like family. So it's absolutely critical to be able to vocalize to your customers, so you're attracting the right customers, but also build into your hiring practices and your employee support practices, recognition practices, the same thing, so that everybody is in alignment with your passion and your purpose, and they're not working at cross purposes.
So much to unpack here. I am with long-term friend, very dear friend, Professor Dr. Adrienne Reynolds, and you are a master at simplifying the complex. And you've actually...
I'm just very passionate about it. So
I could tell. I had to hit record very quickly because that was just golden nuggets there. to give my audience a perspective of your perspective, you are not only a university professor, but you have taught internationally on business and business ethics and in support of women and their rights and bringing their voice into the marketplace. So can you give us a snippet of where you've taught and specifically how you've empowered women to show up in their leadership power in business and in some pretty tough situations?
Sure. Well, I spent the bulk of my adult years outside of the U.S., living in 2 years actually in Saudi Arabia, but most of the time in the United Arab Emirates. But then I would travel to Asia as well frequently for work, both as a university professor, but also working in human resources in mainly startups or corporate reorganizations. And so I've worked in an environment in which I know we have a perception of the Middle East as one being very, one in which women cannot grow, in which women are kind of cloistered and put away. And in some regards, that's true. It is more of a cultural thing. It's not a religious thing at all. It's a cultural thing. So in Saudi Arabia, that was quite true. Women could not drive. The women that I taught, had very few choices they could make through their own autonomy. They had to have permission, from guardians to just to travel to a different city and so forth. But in the UAE, there's that's actually not really the case. There are some women that do not have great autonomy. Others do. In fact, their constitution guarantees the equal rights of men and women for the country. And but again, culturally, traditionally, women tended to be held back. So it was such an interesting place to engage with women that were incredibly ready to make their mark and to kind of give back to their country. In fact, 70% of university students in the UAE are women. So they're very, hungry, if you will. And in fact, during even as far back as the siege of Sarajevo in the conflict in former Yugoslavia, the UAE sent peacekeeping forces as part of the UN, and they had women military there as well to help work with women victims and so forth. So women have kind of played a more unsung role, I guess. But women now want to move into the forefront, and it's so interesting to me to see women want to do something, but they're not sure they can, or they feel like they haven't, they don't have the same skills or abilities or wherewithal or whatever. The way that I was kind of raised and the way that I've kind of lived my life as a woman is I've just always done what I wanted to do. And there was never any, gender type of constraint with that. And so I found that, as a professor and then also working in the business field, a lot of it was kind of showing up by example and
just a moment.
in providing that mentoring component. And it's been great to watch my students. I had a wonderful female student at a university in the UAE where I taught, and she is now general manager of a very interesting company in the UAE. It's a B2B connecting organic farmers, because there's actually a lot of agriculture in the UAE, with more upscale retail outlets in the Middle East, North Africa region for their produce. And she's being groomed to become CEO, and she's in her mid-30s. And I'm just so incredibly proud of her. And in fact, I'm taking students at my local university to the UAE in December on a study abroad trip. And she's going to take us on a tour around her company and give a talk to my students. And so I'm very excited for my students to not only experience that, but to also see a very strong, capable, confident Emirati woman, kind of breaking the Western held stereotypes that we have of women over there. I have no idea if I answered your question.
Oh, this is perfect. And I know this is going to be a multi-part podcast because my podcasts are typically 15 minutes, but your background is so rich and your voice is so needed. More than 50% of dental school graduates are now women. And it is my fear that these women are going to culturally not feel empowered to start their own practice. Right now, there is a consolidation of our field where corporate dentistry, is coming in, and student debt. Now you're not even going to believe this, but the average dentist comes out of school owing $450,000.
That's absolutely insane, but probably a topic for another day.
It is. I know. And you're in the university system. I know you and I, when we went to school, it was probably like $12 an hour, $1 grand to get your degree. Right. And so with this heavy debt, along with lack of business education and empowerment, and the prospects of motherhood and interruption to your career, there are a lot of barriers for women to come in and be an entrepreneur in dentistry. And it takes a lot of courage. And so I really appreciate, there will be no way in a podcast that our listeners can ever understand the depth of your passion about empowering women. But I have known you since you were 17 years old, and I knew both of your parents, and I can tell you, neither one of them are going to tell you how to live your life.
Nope. And I'm so grateful for that.
Right? You're like, fine, tell me what to do. I'll go sleep in my car. I don't care.
And that's what I did.
Living life on my terms. I'm sure this Volkswagen has plenty of room.
Absolutely. I was smaller then, so it worked,
Let's translate. I'm actually going to explore this on my monocast about this, but where do you see from an HR perspective, where do you see that business owners put cultural restrictions, if you will, on their employees that cause the environment to be such where people aren't giving their best or they're holding back, like women in particular? And 99% of dentistry is female, right? There's male dentists, but then most of the team, less than 1% of hygienists are male. So that's 99% women. Less than 0.5% dental assistants are male. Less than 0.2% are probably office managers. So it's 99% women and half the dentists are men. Women are particular creatures. Like we won't often apply for a job if there's too many criteria, because if we can't check every single one, we won't even try. So how do simple things like that from an HR perspective limit, how people might show up? Not intentionally, but what can bosses do to lift some of those cultural governors so that people can show up in their purpose and passion?
Absolutely. One of the first things, and I try and teach this to every single student I have, regardless of whether it's MBA or undergraduate, because one day they're going to either be a manager or a hiring manager or have some type of influence. And I have seen this misperception for decades, and I'm, I guess, single-handedly trying to break it. I don't know, but it is based on evidence and research. There tends to be this idea that when you write up a job description and you're hiring somebody into that job description, they should be able to hit the door, as you said, ticking all the boxes. And applicants have that same perspective as well, that, well, if I can't show that I can demonstrate all of this, I'm not qualified. And actually, that is the worst way to hire somebody from that perspective. I teach that what you want to do is you want to take a look at that listing of tasks and knowledge and so forth. And obviously you want to pick out what are the absolute most critical aspects that must be had walking in the door, right? That the whole job could not be accomplished without those. And so those are, deal breakers. The applicant has to have that, or else they are not qualified. However, it's critical to identify 20% of that job description that the person is not required to know, because they need to have room to grow professionally and personally in that role. I'll give you an example. So I was hired at a corporation, it's a privately owned, but it's a conglomerate in the UAE, portfolio of about 8 different very disparate business products. They had the exclusive rights to sell Mercedes-Benz automobiles. They did oil well fields servicing. They had hotels. They had real estate. They had tourism. So, a wide array of businesses in their portfolio. And all these businesses used to have their own back-end office, finance, HR, purchasing, et cetera. And the chairman and the board decided that they wanted to create a holding company and consolidate all the back-end offices at the holding company level and provide then same services out to all the businesses instead of having all those individual areas. So I was hired to create the first learning and development department in the HR department at the holding company. And so I was hired in September, and this this conglomerate was very generous with their annual bonuses. They were about 40% of a person's yearly salary. And so very, very generous. And they were always paid in January because their fiscal year ran on the calendar year. So I was hired in September, and they had just purchased for $500,000 a new performance management system, which fell under my purview of learning and development. And they said, okay, we've got 3,000 employees and we've got this new system we just spent a whole boatload of money on. We want all of the performance management process put into this system and everybody trained on it immediately. And that's how we're going to pay bonuses. So if you don't have this done in basically a month and a half, nobody's going to get their bonuses in January. And I thought, great, no pressure at all as I'm trying to build my department, because it was just me. I had no team yet. So at the time, it was definitely an employees or a candidates market. Things were booming. So many businesses were being started. It was very hard to find qualified people. I ended up hiring someone who she could have done my work as the manager. She had the same, level of knowledge. She had similar experience to me, but I hired her as a specialist at a lower role, knowing that probably at the 6-month mark when probation would be over, she'd be out of there, because why on earth, if she could do everything in the job description, why would she stay for long, right? That would just get boring if there's no way to grow. And I hired her anyways because I needed help. I could not do all of that on my own. I did not want people getting mad at me for not getting their bonuses. So I hired her, and she was moving from a different country. So for her, it was a foot in the door into the UAE. And she was great. She helped me get everything done. All my goals got met. And then, 6 months she left. There was no way to keep her, right? And that's really true, that whenever we hire somebody and they can already do the job eyes closed, they're not going to stick around for long, or if they are not going to be engaged with what you want your company to be. So long story short, I always say hire someone to do 80% of the job and allow room for them to grow. So that's one thing.
Well, it goes to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and also human design, that this sense of contribution and connection and acknowledgement is part of our DNA. Like it's not a nice to have, it is a must have. And if within your career, those are some of the highest things that you're seeking. It's not necessarily the money. It's, can I be mentally and spiritually challenged and stretched? I can contribute in a new way. I can be acknowledged for those contributions. So I've never heard it put quite like you did, that it starts in the interview and how you write the job description. Make sure there was a role description that I saw, and it was written up in this way. I've been wanting to bounce this off of you for months. And it says, things that I know and I will bring to the job. And there are a few lists. And then there were things that I may not know So this was like the job description being sent back, for consideration to hire. Things you may not know, but we will teach you. And areas that we would like to hold open for your growth and contribution.
Nice.
And I thought that is just a really great template.
Absolutely, it is. It really is, because it also helps to identify early what are the developmental goals professionally for the applicants as well. Yeah, that's a lovely template. I might steal that idea.
I'll send it to you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Investment Grade Practices Podcast. If you find value in this episode, help us spread the word by passing it along to a dental friend, subscribe, and give us a like on iTunes or Spotify. Learn more about building your investment grade practice at productivedentist.com today.